All right, people are starting to roll in. Good to see you guys. Hey, as you're coming in the chat box, please shoot us a comment and tell us where you are in the world. We got people coming from all over, so tell us where you are, where you're from, and we're going to be working off of your questions in the chat box. So make sure. So hopefully you brought some questions with you. We have some things that we want to talk about for sure, but we also want this to be about you guys. So we'll be heavy on the Q&A side. Hey, Simon from Nashville. Thanks for being here, man. Yeah, as you're coming in, tell us where you're from. Just go ahead and jump. Let's get that chat box fired up. But like I was saying, we want this to be about you guys. We want this to be about the questions that you have, the concerns that you have. RL and I've spent the last few days reading, talking with several different real estate leaders about what all this means and working through all of this. We got people from Knoxville, Caitlin from Nashville, welcome. Clarksville, Tennessee, very good. Hey, Sandra, how are you? Good, yeah, again, as you're coming in, go ahead and pop in the chat box. Let us know where you're joining us from. Okema, Michelle, we got an Oklahoman. Good to have you. All right. Maryville, way out east. Hey, Laura, how are you? And Lynn from Oklahoma City, Chattanooga, and Ringgold, Georgia. Very good. Love it. Thank you guys for being here. Michael's coming to us from Norman. Awesome. All right, what time are we?
We're at 9.
We're at 9:01, so we want to be conscious of you guys' time. We'll probably go about 45 minutes today. So anyway, we're glad to have you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to talk to you about this and what this means for us and for the industry. As we're getting started, just a couple of things we want to announce. First is next Wednesday, March 27th. If you happen to be in the Nashville area, we're going to be doing our one-day event. The first half of it is around reading other people's body language and being able to sell to different personality styles. The second half is going to be around Tennessee contract law and how to write contracts, how to write them well, how to understand them. And so we've got a full-day event next Wednesday, March 27th. Also, we've got our 8-week six-figure real estate school. If you don't know about that, please check out our website. You can learn more about six-figure real estate school, and we'll be launching that in the first half of April. So we're looking forward to kicking off another cohort for that. All right, so as we get into this, by the way, we've got Stephanie kind of monitoring the chat box. Go ahead, and if you've got questions about the settlement or have a comment about the settlement, go ahead and pop that into the chat box so that we can get to it as we're kind of talking about these initial parts of it. But please drop your questions in the chat box. We want this to largely be about you guys and make sure that you're getting the answers that you want. The first thing that I will say, let's just go over the settlement first of all. Let's talk about the operative parts of it and the things that are giving people concern. The first thing is on the MLS, we're going to remove the buyer broker compensation block
Completely from the MLS.
Okay, so
No field.
we're not going to have a field for that on the MLS. So that means you're going to have to find that information out some other way. Okay, whether that's texting the agent, whether there's, I don't know, another website created. So that's the first thing, is there's not going to be a buyer broker compensation block. Does that mean there's not going to be buyer broker compensation? No, there's just not going to be a block for it on the MLS.
That's right.
Okay. The second thing is that they're going to require a buyer broker agreement.
Yes.
Prior to working with a client.
Yeah, prior to touring homes was the exact language. We don't yet know what that agreement's going to look like. It could be the existing agreement that's out there,
Mhm.
or it could be something new. The fact that they spell out the language that needs to be included in the agreement leads me to believe that we're going to see a new type of agreement that has to be signed
Yeah.
because it's very specific about how you get compensation and how you state what your compensation is. For instance, they give the specific example that you cannot say as much as this seller is willing to give me. That's
Mhm.
a very specific example they say is not allowed. So that leads me to believe it's a brand new agreement that we don't have in our hands yet, so we don't
Right.
know the specific details.
So that's another detail. Those were kind of the heavier parts of it. What am I missing? Was there another?
Well, I mean, I
Uh,
think the encouraging thing is that they spell out specific ways you can get paid
yeah.
in the agreement. So, specific ways that you are still entitled to buyer broker compensation should they offer it. And they are specifically calling that out in the new agreement. So they are not saying, and they said this multiple times throughout the release,
Mhm.
we are not saying that we did anything wrong. We are not saying that we set this at 6%, but we are saying specifically that you have a way to get paid. And the way you do that is with a fixed fee commission paid directly by the consumer,
Right.
a concession from the seller that was specifically called out, and a portion of the listing broker's compensation. So exactly the same way we've always been paid.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to say about this. So now that we've kind of got the what this thing is saying, I want to talk about how terrible the media was in handling this information.
This is the most disappointing
The
piece.
headlines were 6% is going away. Uh, House prices are going to be cheaper now that there's no realtor compensation. Realtor compensation is going away. Uh, Epic earthquake for the real estate industry. I mean, all of these like gotcha headlines that really had no meat to them and steered consumers in the completely wrong direction. And then you go to these interviews with real estate experts, which was the other additional disappointing part about it, because I'm looking at these, quote unquote, real estate experts or real estate leaders, and I'm expecting them to advocate and to tell the truth about what's going on. And instead, they're using their TV spot to plug their own business. They're not talking about really the operative parts of it. They're saying, "Oh yeah, this is going to change things, and this and that and whatever, and this is what we did to help our clients through this time." And I'm like, this isn't a commercial for your business. This is an opportunity for you to set the record straight, and they didn't do it. And so that's been the other disappointing thing that I've seen from our real estate leaders, and also from the NAR, because the NAR has says largely nothing. Now, I realize that they are the defendant in a lawsuit, and so they probably are being coached by their attorneys not to say a lot until all of this is settled. By the way, it is not settled yet,
Yeah.
right?
Not yet been accepted by the court. So,
Right.
I
Now,
mean,
it probably will be,
this
but
is the
yeah,
proposed settlement,
right,
and it could very well be the settlement.
right.
Release of liability is the other thing that this
Yes.
this did quite a bit for people that hadn't been litigated yet. This release any sort of liability as long as they were a NAR member.
Yeah. Oh, under $2 billion.
Under
Right.
$2
So if
billion.
they did under $2 billion and they were, so anyway. Okay. So yes, this was handled. I think just the media did an awful job.
I've actually got
over
a
the weekend.
couple of friends in my network that are, I won't say which networks, but CNN, NBC types.
Yeah.
Right. And I was reaching out to them about all this and it's just how it was handled. And what he said to me was, you are in this industry and you know this industry. So this surprises you, but this happens every day in every industry, that we use a headline to grab a ton of attention.
Yeah.
And it's not really specifically accurate.
Huh.
And so like these are basically what he's saying is they're using attention grabbing headlines to get people to click, but they understand that this is not really all that accurate
Yeah. And they don't even care.
and they don't even care. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of us are left with, hey, having to answer the questions for our clients. Now, I want to talk about impact. And by the way, again, if you're just joining us, please, we want to make sure this is about you. This isn't just strictly commentary about us. Drop whatever questions, comments that you have in the comment box so that we make sure that we get your questions answered. Michael, yeah, you're saying crappy headlines daily. Yes, in your inbox. That's absolutely right. Welcome from Oklahoma. Okay, so the other thing is impact. And I think there's a couple ways to look at this. The first is that there's going to be short-term impact, and then there's going to be long-term impact. And a lot of this is going to be coming with the consumers. And what you need to be thinking about is the conversations that you're having with your clients about this, because there are going to be quote unquote educated consumers coming to you saying, sellers saying, hey, I don't want to offer the buyer any compensation. And there are going to be buyers saying, hey, I don't want to, how does this work? I don't want to pay anything. And so a lot of this is going to come down to, on the micro level, to the conversations that you are having with your buyers and your sellers and how to have that conversation with them. So the short term impact is that there's going to be, it is probably chaotic, right? When this thing launches, there's going to be the general assumption from the public that, hey, guess what? This isn't going to cost any money. And then you're going to have to combat that. Okay. And the long term scenario is where things sort of settle in the marketplace. So we need to think about a couple of those things. And what I've been talking to our agents about is largely that nothing changes. Not a lot changes if you are having correct conversations. And so there might be a seller. So here, I'll just give you an example of what I'm going to tell my sellers. Okay. Now, listen, you can offer, I'm going to say, hey, Mr. Seller, you can offer a buyer's agent compensation. You cannot offer buyer's agent compensation. The best course of action for you to attract the most buyers to your home is through offering a buyer's agent compensation. Okay. That's going to be the best, because if you don't, here's what happens. We've got a buyer broker agreement that all of these buyers have out there. They're going to be working with an agent, and they're going to have to pay that agent more money, right? Or they've got an agreed upon amount of money that they're going to have to pay if you're not willing to offer compensation. And so you are eliminating a buyer pool, right? If you don't offer buyer's agent compensation. Also, those agents are going to be coming to you asking to negotiate if you don't offer. So it's going to create a little bit of a mess. So I'm going to tell my sellers, the best case scenario is for you to offer a buyer's agent compensation, for you to attract the most amount of buyers that already have agreements locked in with their realtor.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to tell them.
Which is the same conversation we've always been having.
Yeah.
How much do you want to offer, if any? And,
Right. I guess the assumption was like, oh yeah, well, we're not offering these. It's like, yeah, it's always been negotiable.
Yeah.
We've actually seen the trend go down, right? We've all seen this. We've all seen this. Shailene says, yeah, this conversation should have already been happening. I completely agree. Tasha says, curious how this will affect FHA and VA buyers who can't afford an extra fee. Well, if the listing agent isn't offering, or the listing, or if the seller isn't offering compensation, it puts them at a disadvantage.
I'm glad you said that, Tasha, because that is what angers me the most, is that this whole thing was done in the name of the consumer, and none of it is good for the consumer.
Yeah.
None of it, because you're either going to end up with a situation where they can't afford it and now they can't buy a home, or B, they go out there unrepresented and they've got someone who's only interested in the side of the seller. They're unrepresented and they don't get the best terms. So none of it's good for the consumer, but it was done in the name of the consumer. And that's what frustrates me the most.
The other thing is, the buyers. So the other group that could arise in the short term is unrepresented buyers. So people saying, I don't want to lock down anything. I'm just going to go directly to the listing agent. Okay. By the way, that has happened already. We see that we've seen that happen over the years. If you've been a realtor for any amount of time, you've had somebody come in as an unrepresented buyer. Now, here's what I will tell you. Because they happen so infrequently, it hasn't been a large buying group. As unrepresented buyers start to move their way into the marketplace in larger amounts of money, or larger amounts of larger numbers, they're going to work their way as a buying group into a disadvantage, because they're going to be known for lowball offers and having no idea what's going on. By the way, a real estate transaction has not gotten less complicated.
Right.
It's gotten more complicated. And you guys know, if you've worked with unrepresented buyers, they are largely uninformed. They can be very frustrating. They also like to lowball. So that all that's going to happen is that group's going to get bigger, and even sellers are going to start to see is like, I don't want an unrepresented buyer coming,
Yep.
right? Because they're thinking, oh, because unrepresented buyers as a group will be known for they're most likely to bust deals
Yeah.
because they don't understand the process, they don't know how to negotiate,
Yeah.
and they
And
don't know what's normal.
we have a few people speaking up about VA. Michael, Matthew, Shalene.
Yeah.
You're talking about VA. I'm also a lender, and there's actually rumblings already about potentially some changes around how that all plays out as well. We don't know yet because this is also new and again hasn't even been accepted by the courts. But my assumption is the language around what they can and can't do in this situation may change. Again, don't know that for sure, but that's kind of what we're hearing.
Yeah. Is there possible for us to scroll up on the comments? I
Yeah,
want to make sure we don't
yeah, and
miss some of
then
these. We got some great questions coming out of here.
yeah. So the other one was why did they actually settle? Who receives the funds? So we
Right.
can come back to that one.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, we've kind of gotten there. FHA and VA buyers.
So existing listings was one of the questions as well. All of this is supposed to happen in the summer. So again, hasn't been accepted. So we don't yet know what's going to happen to existing listings that would be on the market at the time that this all comes into effect. But, you know, I'm sure we'll hear more about that as we get closer to summertime. I heard mid-July is when they want to have all these changes done to the MLS specifically.
Yeah. Donis says this hurts the buyer. Only the attorneys made that's the thing is this was a class action lawsuit. The attorneys, it's a big cash grab. Let's see. What did Simon say? I feel like this entire lawsuit was money grab. Yeah, absolutely. It does hurt first time home buyers tremendously. Um, the other thing that I would say, Simon, if I'm working with a buyer and I'm saying, hey, listen, this is how this is going to work. What I'm going to do is say, hey, I'm going to basically, if I'm signing that agreement, I'm going to say, and we don't know how the agreement's going to be structured, but my conversation is going to sound something like, hey, I'm going to work to secure my commission from the seller. If I can't, there will be a flat fee of X for my services. That's how that's going to look. So that way I'm walking away with something, even if the seller, but I'm going to negotiate. And this is what you have to be ready to do as a buyer's agent is you have to be ready to negotiate with the seller. One more thing before we get into more questions. Largely, this was born out of a seller's market, not a buyer's market. For you guys that have been in this business a long time, right? You've seen a buyer's market where sellers are offering bonuses to the 3% to get their house sold
Yep.
because they want their house to stand out. And so there's potential for that to come back when we go back into a buyer's market, which will happen eventually. I don't know when. But a lot of this was born out of a seller's market because in some markets I've worked in, buyers were more than happy to offer more money to get agents to attract agents to their home versus another.
And what's funny is it used to be this exact way.
Yeah.
Like in the 90s, cooperative compensation got introduced, and it was supposed to fix all the problems that we had with people running around with unrepresented buyers.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel like we're going back 20, 30 years right now, but
Yeah, it is. It's a big social experiment. We're going back in time. Lilia says, what will happen if seller won't pay buyer's agent and the buyer wants to buy the property without their agent? Is the seller agent obligated to pay the buyer's agent if a buyer's agent has shown the property?
So if they were planning to pay a buyer's agent and you had shown the property, it is our assumption now under the new rules that you would have had a buyer broker agreement because that's now required before you tour properties. So you would be paid under that buyer broker agreement if they were offering compensation. If they weren't, then nobody gets paid.
Yeah. Yep.
So the buyer broker agreement is going to cover if the seller offers compensation, here's what I ask for in compensation. And if they don't, here's what I would ask for from my buyer. And, they're going to have to agree or not agree on that. So it's a negotiation.
Yeah. One of the proposed, and again, a lot of this is speculation. One of the proposed things is that you would have to sign a agreement with a buyer's agent before you go tour properties.
That's right.
Which, by the way, I don't think is a bad thing. That to me, that's a good thing. Is that you're locking down potential clients or you're locking down clients. It's like, hey, if you want to go see houses, this is a serious relationship. This isn't just something that you can kind of do whatever you want and go see as many houses as you want whenever you want. It's like, hey, you got to work with an agent to be able to see these
Yeah.
properties.
And for the agents that are willing to have these conversations,
Yeah.
well, and you should have already been having these conversations in a consultation, that's your time to show your value, what you're offering them, and why you should be compensated.
Yeah.
And this is something that should have been occurring before this ever existed.
Yeah.
So this is just your time to get it on paper as an agreement so that when you move forward, you're not showing them 20, 30 properties and then they go buy, new home construction with someone else.
Hmm.
Like this is your time to actually get compensated for the work that you're doing. So in that sense, that part's a good thing. The settlement as a whole is
Yeah.
not though.
Yeah, I agree. Matthew says, I figured this would create guideline changes for VA. It's possible.
Yeah.
It's certainly possible. We don't know yet until this sort of rolls out in the
My
marketplace.
assumption is that it will at
Yeah.
least, fine tune language around, specific guidelines that lenders have to follow about what is and is not acceptable.
Yeah, a lot of this is semantics because you kind of go, it's like, well, the seller, it's so funny because they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. In one sense, they're saying, well, uh, the sellers are at a disadvantage because they're having to pay 3% to a buyer's agent. But then they're saying, well, this inflates the prices of houses. So it's like, well, if it's inflated houses and the seller's paying for it, then the seller's not at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, which one is it? Is it an inflation if we're inflating house prices, or is the seller disadvantaged?
Yeah.
Because it can't be both
It
simultaneously.
can't be both.
Um,
Lynn, that would be my assumption. We don't yet know for sure, but my assumption would be you would need a release from the existing agent before you could go on. And we also don't know, are these agreements now tied to specific properties that you show them under the agreement? Because right now we assume buyer broker agreement means a long-term engagement, but the words that they use in the actual settlement speak more to the compensation piece. So we don't know if it's going to be tied to a specific group of properties that you're showing on a day or week or whatever, or if it's going to be a long-term agreement. And if it's a long-term agreement, you absolutely would need a release before you could continue doing business with that client.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you're meeting them and they've got a signed buyer broker agreement, and that's always been the case,
Right.
you can't steal them. You really can't advise them, speak to them, any way regarding that. They would have to get a release from their current agent. So yeah. Angela Matlock, hopefully HUD will update the loan options. Historically, they have adapted to the market. 80s, 20s, and rolling closing costs on top were common when I started in the early 2000s. By the way, Angela, good to have you here. Angela is a fantastic realtor in the Oklahoma area. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. But yes,
I think that they will.
I agree.
I'm a little nervous about it though. What you don't want is those, 105% LTV loans out there that ended up, kind of crushing the mortgage market there. So I hope it's not just some crazy options out there like we were introduced prior, but I do think that they will update guidelines so that people can afford to buy homes, because affordability is the big problem that they're trying to solve, but they're making it worse.
Shailene says, I've been requiring that for years. It's so important to have those buyers consultations, educate our clients from the beginning. So if you guys don't know, we have a real estate podcast called The Agent Bridge. And probably we've done about 60, 70 episodes, something like that. In about every episode or every other episode, we talk about how important a buyer consultation is. For more reasons than getting a buyer broker agreement, it's about setting expectations with your client. So to us as real estate coaches, we think that buyer broker agreement being required is one of the best things that could come out of this, because it forces people to talk about the process with a client before they get started. And so I agree with you, Shailene. It's like you got to have that buyer consultation, and now that's going to push more people to do more buyer consultations. So as coaches, we're thrilled.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know that this changes much of anything really, because we can still pursue compensation. And it could be one click off the MLS. So a lot of you do, your property website, or, your photographer has a property website for you. If that's one click off the MLS and the seller's offering 2%, 2.5%, 3%, whatever to the buyer's agent, really easy to find. Right.
Yeah.
So, or you could just put a link in, your MLS. Ours allows it at the bottom, a link or document or whatever that you can download, and it would show the compensation. One click off the MLS. There's just no field for it on the MLS. So I don't know if it changes much. I mean, the awareness around all of this may cause sellers to try this for a while,
Hmm.
and then they realize, hey, I'm not getting top dollar for my house, or I'm not getting
Yeah.
as much traffic as I want, and then they revert back. But my assumption is this probably doesn't change much for us.
Yeah, that's what I would encourage you guys, just like hang in. There's, like I said, there's going to be a short term, like it's going to get a little rocky in terms of like what the consumer is expecting. But most of your really good like referrals that you're working with, they're going to heed your advice, right? And so you just need to be prepared to have the conversation with them to create the best outcome. One of the other examples is I think about, multiple offer situations, and they're like, probably sellers are like, oh, my house is going to go into multiple offer. Well, one of the things that drives a multiple offer situation and people like competing to get to have their client win in a multiple offer situation is that there's money tied to it. How incentivized is that agent going to be to write a multiple offer that's incredibly appealing to the seller if they're not making any money on it? And while I agree that you should always do a great job for your client, I'm speaking in generalities here. While I think it's good for you to always work hard for your client, no matter how much you're going to get paid, you still have to think about there's real impact there in terms of, hey, if an agent's not getting paid, how hard are they going to work to get that multiple offer accepted? So we got to think about that in this scenario too. Nobody's really talking about, hey, one of the things that drives these multiple offer situations, drives competitive offers, is that agents that are going to be incentivized by money are out there doing it. Some more questions, guys. What else do we have in the chat box that we need to get to? Um, by the way, again, thank you guys for joining us. While I'm waiting for some new questions to come in for you guys that joined us a little bit later, we've got a live event in Nashville um, next Wednesday. Watch your email for details on that. We'd love for you to join us. And then we are kicking off, and first part of April, kicking off another 8-week cohort for Six-Figure Real Estate School. Go to theagentbridge.com to learn about all of that, to learn about all those things. Okay, we're about at the 30-minute mark. Any other questions? I want to make sure we get to you guys' questions if you've got any more. Any other, we're coming up about the 30-minute mark. Any other
I
commentary?
just feel like we're hitting like an era of real estate that's all about experimentation, right? We had like
Yeah.
the iBuyers that didn't work out so well. We still have fee listing companies that are out there that are getting some business, but they're not taking over the market. Like you're not seeing flat fee listing companies like just outpace every other real estate arm. So I think a lot of experiments are being tried. This being one of them. It just happened to get legs in the courts because lawyers want their money, as we indicated earlier.
Yeah.
I just don't know how well it works for the long term because, again, it's in everyone's best interest to have their own representation. And I think everyone deep down understands if I'm going to be represented by someone, they have to be compensated.
So Jen asks, why did NAR settle when they're saying they did nothing wrong? Is it a legal thing? Who receives the funds?
I mean, they're paying millions and millions of dollars to run this thing through, and I don't know if everyone on this live knows this, but there were, upwards of 13, 14, 15 legal battles they were up against, and it was just going to be more. Every state was getting involved. So Georgia just popped up. There were several others, Texas, a few others, and this was going to drain them dry long before they settled and just wrapped everything into one. So I kind of don't blame them in that case. I don't love the way that they worded everything, but at some point you're either going to be bled dry in the courts or, write a $418 million check.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if anybody on this live has been through a lawsuit, a lot of times you're just like, man, we got to just get this over with.
China,
Right.
they specifically released something yesterday. They are not increasing fees due to this settlement. Now, how 2 years down the road, if our fees jump up $100 a year, maybe. But as of now, they're specifically saying no, we're not upping the fees due to this settlement.
So Sarah says, I work exclusively with sellers, but I'm curious about this. Will buyers agents be able to contract with buyers to only show homes where compensation is offered? I don't think that would be the case. I don't think they're going to say, hey, we're only going to I'm only going to show you houses where compensation is being offered.
There's language around that.
Yeah.
If you're a NAR member, you are specifically not allowed to do that, and you cannot have language around that. Now, does that incentivize people to do it without saying it out loud?
Mhm.
Maybe, but they specifically called attention to that specific case, and it is not allowed.
Yeah. Now, Sarah, as you're working with your sellers, if I'm a listing agent, I'm encouraging my sellers again to continue to offer buyer's agent compensation to sell their house for the most amount of money,
Yep.
right? To create competition, to create incentive, to incentivize agents to bring strong offers. So
And
I want to work with great agents too, and great agents are going to have are going to want to get paid. And so, yeah, I'm going to continue to tell my sellers to offer buyer's agent compensation.
TAR, will they provide new forms? I think every MLS or state out there, state realtor organization will have to provide new forms just
Yeah.
because there's going to be so many changes.
China says, "Well, we get to break away from NAR and establish more independent roles as agents." It really depends. A lot of our MLSs are owned by the National Association of Realtors, so depending where you are. So you may not have the option because they might require NAR membership to be a part of the MLS. And that's kind of that they've kind of got
There were a
their
couple,
thumb on you a little bit to have MLS membership.
yeah, there were a couple states that came out and specifically stated that you were not required to be a NAR member any longer. I don't know how long that lasts. I don't know if that continues. I don't know if everybody looks at this and says, we're going to form a different entity.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone knows at this point. Right now, there are many MLSs that do require NAR membership.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't really know how that's going to shake out, but yeah, I that's where NAR really has their thumb on you is if if the MLS requires NAR membership to join the MLS.
Sarah,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people feel the same way you do, that sellers will continue to offer compensation or that you will advise them to do just that. I believe that more often than not, that will still be the case.
yeah. Shailene, yes, it's our pleasure. That's one of the things that we saw a gap in the marketplace where it felt like there's either people that are panicking, there's media giving terrible headlines, and then who are the people who are supposed to be our industry leaders are just using it as an opportunity to plug their own businesses, and so especially with the media, and so it's like, man, nobody's really explaining exactly what to do here and what's coming and how to handle it, and so we wanted to jump in and fill that gap.
Pamela says something that I think is very funny but very true, because I feel the same way. It's like she's saying, well, the lawsuits around people felt duped around the fact that they were paying buyers agents, but now we're making it harder to find the information. So it's supposed to fix the problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. Like now we've got to go off the MLS to find it,
Uh-huh.
and now it's here. This is so frustrating because nobody was duped. There are
Yeah.
so many pieces of paper. And in what industry can someone sign a document that they had full autonomy to read, agree to, and sign and negotiate,
Uh-huh.
and then go back and say, I didn't know?
Yeah.
And that's an okay argument.
Yeah.
None that I know of.
Well, yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, the other thing is like we're conspiring to fix. I don't even know. See, that's why NAR said we didn't do anything wrong. If you go look, every single one of us has had to go to code of ethics. What do they say over and over again? There is no standard fee. You have to, it's like there's commissions are negotiable. We've always said that.
This is very frustrating. So NAR, I don't know if everybody saw this, but yesterday, maybe the day before, but yet I think it was yesterday, did a release that says we have never forced 6% commissions. The fact that they had to say that was
Yeah.
so frustrating, because I don't know what it's like in some of these other markets. Well, actually, I know most of Oklahoma, so, and that's some of the other folks on the call, but you know that's never been, I've never walked into a meeting and said, hey, well, it's 6%. Sorry, my hands are tied.
Yeah.
Like, no, I've never once said that. Like, it's always started at like, hey, you're working with me on the sell side. You're going to work with me on the buy side too. I'm going to cut you a break. We're going to start off at 4.5 or
5% or something. Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
I feel like's comfortable for me. And, I'm going to offer this much to the buyer. I'm going to keep this much, and we're going to move on. And never once have I said, sorry, handcuffed, 6%.
I know. Or we have to pay the buyer's agent 3%. As a matter of fact, again, we see that more and more, like 2.5% offered, 2% offered. And guess what? We've all done that.
Every industry has a standard. Like tipping has always been, start at 20% or start at 10% in the 90s. And now it's kind of been moved to 20%. So everybody knows that's kind of like the guideline. So if like you're not getting good service, you drop it or,
Mhm.
so like every industry has these norms, but that doesn't mean that anybody's forced into
Yeah.
that. Like if you get great service, then maybe you'd want a higher commission for it.
Yeah.
Same thing here. I start at a certain point with my friends and family, at a different point if you're a client, and if you're a repeat with me, maybe I start even lower than
Mhm.
that. But it's never been 6%. It's been a negotiation every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah. Angela says, can we expand that? Because I think she's got kind of a longer question. Been thinking about how Oklahoma client representation changed some years back, where we suddenly um, owed brokerage duties to all principals of the transaction. If I am a listing agent now, I'm only being paid to represent the seller, and the buyer comes unrepresented. We still owe those duties to an unrepresented buyer. We will have to really educate agents what the duties there are to these buyers. Where do we limit our service to them? It certainly feel like our loyalty lies with the paying seller. Yeah, I remember Oklahoma changed to I don't remember what it's like. Everybody's a transaction broker or something like that. And I haven't kept up with exactly what's if that's still the case. But yes, in a lot of cases, you're a fiduciary to the seller, and honestly, what I think, Angela, is that as we move into this, you're going to recommend that buyer go get representation because it's going to be a pain, right? Because a lot of these again, those buyers unrepresented buyers as a group will probably increase, and they're going to be the most likely to bust deals, most likely to lowball. And as agents, we don't see a lot of them now. As we see more and more of them, you're going to probably recommend it's like, hey, listen, the best thing for you to do in this transaction is for you to go be represented by a real estate agent so that you get and here's one you can use.
I do think because this is going to be so much more frequent, there'll be some additional language around this. My assumption is that you become some sort of facilitator with the unrepresented buyer, no fiduciary duties really other than writing up the contract, and then you have all your fiduciary duties to your seller. I think that this will get a lot more language around it as we get into it, is my assumption.
Right.
And yes, Michelle, that's exactly how it is. And I don't know how they won this either. But yes, sellers pay listing agent X amount, and the seller's agent offers that compensation, half of that compensation or some of that compensation to the buyer's agent. That's exactly how this plays out. I have no idea how this was read any differently in the courts.
Pamela says, will this open up consumers suing sellers for forcing them into not getting representation? I'm trying to think.
I didn't read that question. Say that
Yeah,
again.
it says, will this open up consumers suing sellers for forcing them into not getting representation? Possibly. I mean, although I think, but the other thing is like, I think sellers, if they try to not offer buyer's agent compensation, they're going to limit themselves in the marketplace. And I think maybe while that happens in the short term, in the long term, I think they're going to find that it's a bad idea in terms of selling their property because already do it. You have for sale by owners they're like, I'm not paying a realtor. What happens to
Yeah.
them? They sit on the market forever.
Pamela, so it in this specific agreement, it's about 108 pages. It calls attention to this new buyer broker agreement. It all the language around it is around compensation, not similar to the existing agreement that's out there for buyer broker relationships. So my assumption is this new agreement is going to be mostly compensation based,
Yeah.
so that the buyer is more aware about how you are compensated. So I don't I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out. I don't know if that just gets rolled into the existing agreement, if it's a brand new agreement, if it's
Mhm.
tied to specific properties or all properties, if it's for the life of your relationship. I don't know all the answers to those yet, but my assumption is that the language that's getting added is almost exclusively around compensation.
Donna says, any thoughts about how this might affect teams? Yeah, teams have to think about. Well, again, if I, as a team leader, I'm going to be talking with my agents about, again, conversations with buyers about how this whole thing works and getting them to go ahead and commit to a buyer broker compensation. Now, what has happened with teams a lot is, that there's an assumption that there's going to be a buyer's agent commission paid, and you can't assume anymore. You can't assume. So you've basically, it's like, hey, look, we got to get a contractual agreement on the front end, and so that's going to change. So what's really going to change is that the conversations are going to be had more frequently and sooner in a relationship with the consumer.
I think what
Yeah.
they were trying to do is just get the conversation started because right now, again, you assume, and you can go find it on the MLS readily. And by taking it off the MLS, which is the only thing that they do in fact control, by taking it off the MLS, you've got to go do your due diligence to find it. So their assumption is you're just going to show them any property available, whether it has compensation or not. Whereas in the past, if they had left it on the MLS, but you could put zero, then you might be incentivized to steer them away from those properties. And in this case, you can't because it's not readily available, but it will be. It'll be one click off.
Will the buyers be able to? Will the buyer be able to? Buyer's compensation, I think, is what you meant, Roseanne. Will the buyer's compensation be able to be rolled into their loan? It's a great question. We don't know yet. We'll see. That's gonna depend on the lending market.
So we have three ways we can be compensated now as buyer's agents that NAR has specifically called attention to: fixed fee commissions paid directly by your clients, concessions from the seller. So seller concessions are common right now in our market, at least in many markets. They could use that concession to pay the buyer's agent, or a portion of the listing broker's compensation, which is how it mostly works today. So those three ways exist in the future to get paid. The concession from the seller would be the one that most aligned with what you were saying. I doubt, depending on, I doubt it gets rolled into a loan. Now, could there be some changes to how loan structures work? Possibly. But my assumption is it probably wouldn't be rolled into the loan.
Or you couldn't list it at that item. But I mean,
Yeah.
technically you say it's
That's
rolled
right.
into the loan now, but it can't be listed as
That's right.
buyer's agent compensation currently. But again, probably the way this is going to play out is like it's rolled into the loan anyway, people.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me
Yeah.
rephrase. So
Yeah.
you could maybe you say like we're going to up the price of the house $6,000. You're going to offer a $6,000 concession. I'm going to use that for my
Right. Yeah.
for my buyer's compensation, and then yes, it's rolled into the loan because the price went up $6K.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a line item that you could say added to the loan cost. No.
And here's the other thing: is you guys need to be very intentional about being a better negotiator, because you're going to have to negotiate more for your compensation on the buy side with both your buyer and potentially the seller. And so you need to learn proper phrasing, conversation, learn how to be a better negotiator, right? And by the way, this has been the way the commercial industry has worked forever. As a commercial agent, you've got to go and say, hey, how much commission's being offered, and work to secure your commission either from the seller or from your buyer, depending. And so a lot of it's been going on. The commercial agents are laughing because they're going, yeah, we've been doing this forever, right? Honorata, maybe we should change the language and charge a fee for the services provided. In other words, know your value and charge accordingly. Yeah, you can. It's just who's going to pay the fee, and a lot of times your first time buyers aren't going to have extra cash to pay that.
Yeah. The people that are going to survive, the agents that are going to survive in this market, are the ones that can effectively spell out their worth, and share that with all parties involved, and be a good negotiator, and you will continue to get compensated. I can assure you, whether it's from your buyers, whether it's from the sellers, people are going to want to do business with good agents, and it's proving your worth and being able to, share that with all parties, and you'll be just fine. I promise.
The final word here that I would say as we wrap up is don't be afraid to have these conversations. Be forthcoming, talk with your buyers. I think it's a great thing to talk with your buyers about, hey, the seriousness of purchasing a home, the serious of the contractual obligations that you are, that's what I've seen more and more. And I've been in this business for 15 years, is buyers get into these scenarios and then they think it's like buying something at Walmart and you can just return it. So I think again about the conversations that you're having with your clients on both the buy side and the sell side. And you need to be better at having them because you can't just make assumptions anymore. You need to talk about, and that's how you stand out as a professional. The people who are going to win here and the people that where the biggest opportunity here is for you to separate yourself as a professional again amongst amateurs, right? To separate yourself as a professional amongst amateurs. And so make sure you're continually working on your skills, your negotiation ability, and be forthcoming and have those conversations on the front end. Any final words from you?
Yeah, I mean, just that. Just learn that this is just another milestone in real estate. You know, things always get, all industries go through a shakeup from time to time. This will come out in the wash. You'll have a way to get compensated. I promise you. There's actually they've already announced 3 ways you can get compensated, and this was induced into the real estate market a long time ago for a reason, and it's worked really well for a long time.
Yeah.
It's just you're going to have to go about it a little differently.
Yeah.
Nothing to worry about.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bringing your questions. We're going to continue to do more of these, so pay attention to what's happening in the group. TheAgentBridge.com. The podcast on YouTube is The Agent Bridge or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Again, we're so glad you guys joined us today. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great week. Go out there and be professionals. Thanks, guys.
Bye.